Tonight, a special Greater Boston. Our series of the only televised primary debates in Massachusetts continues. Next up, the race for state auditor, also known as the Chief Accountability Officer. The auditor analyzes and investigates how state agencies operate and spend taxpayer dollars to make sure we're getting what we collectively pay for. I'm joined by the two Democrats vying for the job ahead of primary election day, which is September 6th. Diana DiZoglio is a state senator since 2019 from Methuen, who served as a state rep for 6 years prior. Chris Dempsey served as an assistant secretary of transportation under Governor Deval Patrick, led the 2015 No Boston Olympics effort, and most recently he ran the nonprofit Transportation for Massachusetts. As always, the rules, there are none. But time is short, so brevity is appreciated, actually required. They should feel free to talk to each other, just not over each other. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get in. Thank you both so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Well, the auditor doesn't make a huge amount of news, but in September she will, when she certifies how much revenue the state's taken in, and if it exceeds that revenue, the so-called tax cap from 1986, how much is returned. Starting with you, that's a statutory responsibility. The auditor also has a bully pulpit. Let's talk about that for a second. If there is an excess of $2 or $3 billion, as is suggested, should that be returned to the taxpayer pursuant to the law, or should that law be reformed in some fashion?
So this is Chapter 62F, and the auditor's role here is very clear. It's why you want a manager and someone with finance experience in this role, not a politician. And I think the auditor needs to do that calculation. It's for other people to decide where that money should go. If I were in the legislature, which I'm not, and I'm not running for the legislature, I would say those dollars should be returned to taxpayers.
Exactly as the law mandates.
Well, look, at this point, the legislature lost its opportunity, and that's on the legislature for not fixing that. The auditor issues this report every single year. There's nothing unique about this year, other than that the revenues are coming in higher.
Should they have fixed it, to use your word?
Yes, they should have fixed it.
How so?
Well, that's up to them, and we can figure out the details. There was an economic development bill that I thought was a good start. That would have been a good opportunity to move forward, and that got stalled because they hadn't caught this in time.
Okay, we are where we are. Let's say it's $3 billion, as most suggest. Should it be returned as the law requires?
Yes, and what I'd like to talk about, Jim, is what I want to do in the auditor's office to make sure something like this never happens again. I've released my plan recently, having stayed up all night to actually have debates regarding these various issues, including the economic development bill. I can tell you the legislature should have never waited until the last minute to take up the economic development bill in the first place. However, they were surprised with this information, and this information should have been something that we in the legislature had. The auditor has a role to play that is largely a confirmatory role, where she confirms what the commissioner of DOR says regarding the revenues that are coming in. The commissioner of revenue reports quarterly, giving those reports to the comptroller's office, where the auditor has a seat on the advisory board for. That comptroller's office meets 4 times a year. If the auditor was pushing for, which I plan to do, for these revenue reports to be discussed at those quarterly meetings, this might not have caught us by surprise. So as your next state auditor, I'll make sure that I'm pushing for these things to be discussed at those quarterly revenue meetings, or those quarterly comptroller meetings.
Do you both support the fair share amendment, the so-called millionaires tax that's on the ballot? You both do,
Yes,
correct?
have for years.
That would tax the wealthy at a higher rate. This would return money, the tax cap, at a higher rate to the wealthy. Why aren't you saying, just like you support the Fair Share Amendment, I support returning the money to the taxpayers, but the law should be amended so it's returned more equitably? I don't get it. They're two in conflict concepts.
Well, we've never had a conversation in the legislature yet at this point since I've been in about actually amending the law, and I'd be happy to have that conversation. I do think that right now taxpayers are in need of relief at a time when we have inflation, at a time when we have gas prices out of control. And yes, I do support the Fair Share Tax Amendment. My opponent's been pushing for a 25-cent gas tax increase for years on working families in our communities, which disproportionately impacts those that are coming from lower income communities. I think there's a better way to fund our transportation and education system, and that's with the Fair Share Amendment,
so I want
not
to be clear,
with an increase in the gas tax.
If I may, Senator, so would you support amending the tax cap law so the $3 billion, I'm just picking that figure, is returned more equitably, yes or no?
I would support giving the money back to the taxpayers.
In a more equitable fashion, or is way the law
in a more
required?
Equitable fashion, for sure. We just looked at how
So
to
amend the
balance equity with returning the dollars.
So amend the law.
I would be open to it.
And would you be open to it?
I think we just heard the senator take about 3 different positions on one issue. She's saying, when I'm auditor, I'll be sure to catch this. She's in the legislature. It was the legislature's job to catch this. They didn't catch it, and now we're left with a situation where we are going to return these funds and not have a better economic development bill that could have been passed in time. I don't know.
She is right, though. You do support a 25% increase in the gas tax, or at least you have. Is that not correct?
Absolutely. My role as Transportation for Massachusetts was not to say exactly what the legislature should do, but to call out the needs and the resources that we need to actually fix transportation. That's exactly the job of the auditor. It's not to set policy. It's to be clear with the facts and the data about what our Commonwealth
Yeah, but
needs.
with all due respect, it is a bully pulpit, and a lot of things I've heard you talk about in this campaign are things you don't statutorily have the power to do. She says she would recommend that an amendment to the tax cap happen so it's returned more equitably. You would not. Is that correct?
No, I said that the economic development bill would be a better way to redistribute
So you would amend the
those
tax
dollars.
cap as it currently is?
If I had been in the legislature, which I was not, I would have caught it in time.
Okay, so let's
If
talk
my
about...
opponent was in the legislature, he would have been fighting for a 25-cent gas tax increase on working families right now, and that to me is unacceptable.
You know, I think one of a number of things I hope you both agree upon is accountability and transparency is obviously central to the mission. I'm sure you saw a Globe editorial over the weekend that took you to task about questionnaires from advocacy groups, which basically said that not only should the questions be disclosed, but the candidates' answers. Otherwise, you were, to quote them, making promises in secret. With the exception of a reproductive questionnaire, which the organization has said release could endanger lives, which he has not posted. He's posted all the others. You've still, at least as of 2 hours ago when we checked, not posted the Mass Teachers Association questionnaire, nor the AFSCME questionnaire, even though your campaign said you would. Why not?
We actually have been posting them. I believe those are up right now, if I'm correct. People can go and check, and if they're not, they're being posted shortly. We spoke to the MTA yesterday, got permission from them. Very graciously, they were more than happy to give us permission to post their questionnaire. We've been making our way through these organizations, respecting their process. What my opponent
What
did...
if they had said no? Your campaign said several days ago to the Globe that they would release them.
Nobody said no.
What if they had said no? Your campaign said you'd release them.
Then we would have to have that conversation if that was happening. But I'm not here to talk about shoulda, woulda, coulda. I'm here to talk about what's actually happening. And what I can say is what happened is my opponent preemptively and recklessly released an email and a press release that stated that he had already posted all questionnaires to his website. Did you or did you not, Chris, post Reproductive Equity Now's questionnaire to your website?
How about that?
The answer is very clear. We did not.
So then you lied about posting all questionnaires in a press release, calling on both of your opponents to be transparent and honest.
We didn't do that, Jim. We put out a press release that said we will be posting them all, and from the
Past
minute
tense.
we put from the
It was
minute
past
we
tense.
Let him
from the
finish,
minute we
please.
put that out, we said that the Reproductive Equity Now questionnaire would be coming soon. We have been in conversations with them for weeks. They have expressed some concerns about the information being released and the questions, not the answers. And we want to respect that at a time when reproductive rights are under attack at the Supreme Court. We want to be extremely careful and thoughtful. Every other questionnaire goes up on our website.
Speaking of transparency, the senator has led the charge for non-disclosure agreements to be banned on Beacon Hill. Not successfully yet, but she's been relentless about it. They bar victims from speaking out about settlements. You, on the other hand, according to Senator DiZoglio, voted not to ban, against banning such agreements in the Brookline town meeting. One, is that true? And two, why?
Jim, nobody should experience harassment or retaliation in the workplace. It's completely unacceptable. On this issue, I stand by my vote, and I stand with experts in the field. You've had on this show a woman named Ellen Zucker. She is world-renowned for her defense of victims of harassment in the workplace. And she said, as recently as this Friday in the Boston Bar Journal, that she disagrees with Senator DiZoglio's stance on this issue, calling out the senator by name, saying that the senator's absolutist approach on this issue is not the one that best protects victims. So I stand with victims, and I stand with victims advocates on this issue.
And against the ban.
I believe that victims are best served. I agree with Ellen Zucker that victims are best served when there's an opportunity to come to a non-disclosure agreement for both parties.
How about it?
I was actually writing the op-ed piece in contradiction to that, and I was proud to do so. What my opponent voted for was to force, not give victims an option, force non-disclosure agreements paid for with our tax dollars on victims of harassment, discrimination, and abuse in the town of Brooklyn. And it was one of only 66 people in the town to vote for it. Thankfully, the rest of the town meeting members voted against my opponent's attempt to support the abuse of tax dollars that fund non-disclosure agreements in cases like sexual harassment and like racial discrimination, which we know we've seen many alleged circumstances of in the town of Brooklyn, unfortunately. I don't believe that we should be using tax dollars to cover up any sort of abuse, harassment, discrimination of any kind. And for the auditor to say, or an auditor candidate to say that they don't support transparency and accountability surrounding these agreements, and that they support the abuse of tax dollars going to silence victims of harassment and discrimination and protect powerful perpetrators and powerful politicians is absolutely unacceptable.
I want to
Jim,
move. Yes,
could I answer
quickly,
on this?
quickly,
The senator
please.
has her facts wrong on this. There was a settlement on the case that was the most high profile. I think you've also covered this on your show, but a firefighter who was discriminated against. I voted to provide that firefighter a settlement, and I voted for no non-disclosure agreement as part of that settlement. She has her facts wrong, and she is completely misstating the issue.
2020
when
vote.
she says,
Let us finish, please,
Let
then
me
you can
finish,
respond.
Senator. When she says that I somehow forced victims, but I'm on the record as having voted for a settlement without an NDA. She has her facts wrong, and she's trying to make this an issue that is not an issue. Again, I stand with victims, and I stand with advocates for victims on this issue.
Very briefly.
My opponent is on the record. We have the record, and we are happy to give it to any reporters or anyone seeking it, where my opponent voted to support the town's abuse of taxpayer-funded NDAs, giving the victim no option, forcing non-disclosure agreements on victims of harassment, discrimination, and abuse.
We have to move ahead. Shirley Young wrote, I thought, perfectly in the Globe the other day, every day is a public transit crisis. What would you do as auditor to bring accountability to the T? Quickly, if you can.
I'm the only candidate in this race that's committed to conduct a full safety audit of the T, the Carmen's Union, the MBTA inspectors, the machinist, all the workers of the union whose endorsement we have in this race. They have stood by my call for a safety audit of the MBTA. We literally have trains catching on fire right now. There are a host of safety issues. We have lines being shut down. My opponent, for as much as he loves to talk about being Assistant Secretary of Transportation, was part of the failed culture of transportation that led to what we're seeing now. I don't think anyone at home can disagree that our public transportation system has never properly served the people of Massachusetts. We need a safety audit. We need it now, and I'm the only candidate in this race to commit to doing that.
Speak to both issues, if you would, please. Both the audit, Chris Dempsey, and the issue about this failed culture.
Jim, this is an issue that's very personal to me. I took the MBTA here to this debate. When I kiss my wife goodbye every morning, she gets on the Green Line to commute to work. This is the first time in my life that I've taken the T and genuinely questioned my safety while riding a vehicle, and that needs to change. We're putting out a 4-point plan. It's available to your viewers right now as a sneak peek, and we'll be launching the full plan tomorrow in Nubian Square Station at 8:30 a.m. It's going to cover 4 points, and we're happy to get into the details. I know we don't have much time, but we are going to do a day one audit of the MBTA following the recommendations of the Federal Transit Administration. We're also going to put in a budget request for $2 million so that we can staff up an office of MBTA accountability within the auditor's office so that we have the specialized staff and resources to actually help the MBTA get better. Now, on the question of culture at the MBTA, I'm incredibly proud of the work that I have done to make Massachusetts' transportation system work better. I co-founded the MassDOT program that led to all of the smartphone applications that tell you in real time when your bus or your train will come. I used one of those apps today, and Jim, we made the MBTA, which I agree is not an agency known for innovation, we made the MBTA the very first transit agency on the entire East Coast to make those apps available to riders. I have made the T work better, and as auditor, I'm going to make it work better again.
At a BUR debate the other day, you were both asked if you supported the Governor Baker's decision to do these mass shutdowns. You both said no. He's not alone. Mayor Wu supports it. She said it's stressful, but it'll save us years of disruption. So both Governor Baker and Mayor Wu are wrong on this strategy?
I agree with the strategy and concept. The idea of getting 5 years of work done in 30 days is a very attractive one. I don't have confidence in the Baker administration to execute on the 30-day plan. That's the difference.
How about you, quickly?
I don't have confidence in the Baker administration to do it either. And like I said, things have gotten to this point after years of not being handled previously from prior administrations as well, while my opponent was Assistant Secretary of Transportation and did not deal with these safety issues back then. We are now living what we're living, because things weren't handled back then and need to be handled now. And I have continued to call on my opponent to agree to do a safety audit, and he still is not committed to do it.
Quickly on that.
We need more than press releases to fix this issue. That's what the senator is offering here, a press release that says I call for a safety audit. I encourage people to go to my website, dempseyforauditor.com/MBTA, and read our 4-point in-depth plan, which will talk about how the auditor's office can help be a part of fixing the MBTA.
I would assume every single person watching, since it appeared in the Globe in 2017, is aware of the Federal Reserve study about the wealth gap in this community. They can all recite it. $250,000 for a white family, $8. Black family, $3,500. Puerto Rican family, $0 for a Dominican family. What can the auditor's office do, if anything, to shine a light and help reduce that disparity?
There's a lot, Jim.
Like what?
It's completely unacceptable that that's the status quo in our society. I think a central role here is to look at contracting and also to look at how we are investing our dollars. The very first plan that we put out in this campaign, before any other candidate put out any plan, was on the investment of the $5.3 billion in federal stimulus dollars that we have to spend over the next 3 to 4 years. And in that plan, we're adopting many of the recommendations of what's called the Racial Equity Scorecard, developed by the NAACP, the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, the Mass Public Health Association, and others, so that we have equity metrics to determine how those dollars are being spent and if they're actually making our communities more fair, more equitable, and addressing that wealth gap.
What would you do, Senator?
I would implement my social justice and equity audit plan as someone who was born to a 17-year-old single mom, grew up in the cities of Methuen and Lawrence. You mentioned Dominican families. Most of my neighbors are Dominican. Y claro que hablo en español y aprendí cómo hablar porque es muy importante. I learned how to speak Spanish so that I could better work alongside of my neighbors and the people that I grew up with in our communities who want nothing more than to have a voice in what's happening in state government and to be heard. As part of my social justice and equity audit plan, I have a plan to help to diversify our state contracting and procurement processes and procedures. Right now, GBH has done some great reporting on this. Only about 0.005% of state contracts actually go out to minority businesses. That's completely unacceptable. We can do better, and my social justice and equity audit plan seeks to look at these contracts, find ways that we can make our system work more equitably for all families in Massachusetts, regardless of our family background, our bank balance, or our zip code.
Speaking of GBH has done great reporting. I have nothing to do with it, so I can say that, by the way. The auditor, Suzanne Bump, did an audit about workers in public construction contracts, and as I'm sure you both know, 60% of them had no women, a quarter of them had no people of color. They've also done the reporting on the contracts themselves and how few go to minority-owned firms. What else should the auditor be doing on that minority contracting front when the numbers are so pitiful? Quickly.
This is the first 3 points of my social justice equity audit plan. What I would like to do is actually do a deep dive into different state agencies to see if they are complying with any sort of a diversity, equity, and inclusion model, such as Massports, for example, which has a 25-point diversity, equity, and inclusion model to try to make sure that we are actually meeting our DEI goals. City of Boston has also done a lot of work on this front, but not all state agencies are actually doing this. So I would use the Taxpayer Protection Act, which actually gives the auditor the ability to go into these RFP processes, these procurement processes, and actually look at the contracts themselves and what the process looks like. That is meant to save taxpayer dollars, but it can also be used to increase equity across the board to make sure that working families are getting access to these important
Got a hold
contracts.
it there. How about you?
Jim, I'm glad that the senator mentioned the Massport model. The person who created that model, Tom Glynn, is supporting my campaign. I'd be interested in hearing the senator talk in more depth about how that model actually works. I do think it's a good model. I'm not sure the senator completely understands how it works. Y si quieres realizar este debate en español, podemos hacerlo, senador.
Okay, that's a tie on that front.
If I might just say, with all due respect, Chris, the comment about understanding, as the Senate chair of the Small Business Committee, I worked directly with the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts on provisions to increase accountability around our state's Supplier Diversity Office, and actually my office played an instrumental role in making sure that the Supplier Diversity Office is held accountable regarding this administration's mandate to diversify equity in state contracting.
I have to hold you
so
there.
I understand very well, though I am used to, unlike my opponent up on Beacon Hill, trying to discredit the work of women
You
up
have
on Beacon
15
Hill.
seconds.
So I find that
Do
unfortunate.
you want to respond to that? You don't have to. You can-
I didn't hear an explanation of how the Massport model works, and I'm still not sure.
Okay.
We have a consensus on that.
You start as auditor in January. What's the first audit and why, Senator? Quickly. And by the way, you've gotten a little more time because of me, so we'll try to bend it back in that direction. Go ahead.
So we could do many things to start. You don't need to pick just one or two, but what I want to do first is have the National Association of State Auditors take a look at the office and do an audit of the office so that when I come into the office, I'm able to understand, if there are challenges in the office that need to be fixed, and I would do an audit of the auditor's office. Then I would get to work implementing my social justice and equity audit plan, which can be found on my website, that seeks to address inequities in things like housing, mental health services, addiction services, pay equity,
You believe
and
you can
more.
audit the legislature. Your two predecessors, if you're elected, don't agree with you. Why do you think you have the power to audit the
Look,
legislature as an
it
auditor?
was done back in 1922, and it's been done before. It's been done subsequently after that. It has been something
Suzanne
that's
Bump
been
and
done
Joe
before.
Danucci don't agree with you. Do you agree that the auditor's office has the power to audit the legislature?
Well, first of all, I'm very proud to have Auditor Bump's support in this race. She's the first woman to ever hold the office. She's the person who knows the job the best, and she's strongly on my side, along with 24 women in the legislature, including many of the senator's colleagues, and the Senate president announced her support for me today. People like that have worked with both people in this race. They've sat down, they've thought about it, and they're squarely on my side. I don't see authority for the auditor to audit the legislature, but certainly I'm going to use this office to its full potential. If that is something that a general counsel that I hire says is a possibility, absolutely we will do it.
What's your first audit and why? What's your what's the thinking behind the auditing that you do?
Well, Jim, we haven't talked today about my plan to do carbon accounting to make the office a national leader on climate by holding agencies accountable for the laws that are on the books that require them to reduce emissions. We'll also create an Auditor's Commission on Environmental Justice so that people who are on the front lines of the climate crisis have a seat at the table on Beacon Hill. They're too often not heard. I want to make sure their voices are heard. We're also going to tackle tough issues like reform of the Massachusetts State Police. And I have great respect for our troopers on the front lines, but we need more oversight and reform of that agency.
Jim,
Quickly
if
on
I might just
very
interject.
quickly,
Thank you
please.
so much. Of course, my opponent has the support of folks like the Senate president and the incumbent auditor that I have taken to task on why things like auditing the taxpayer, the abuse of taxpayer-funded NDAs have not been analyzed as I've been requesting. Of course, he has the support of the
Senate passed your NDA thing.
The
did it
Senate
not? It's the
did.
House
The
that's
Senate
problem.
did. The state auditor has not audited this as I have requested in recent years. And of course, my opponent has the support of the legislative establishment because I have been calling to audit.
gotta bring
I've been
balance back to the
calling to
time.
audit the legislature
Do you have a
time
quick-
and time again.
I mean,
Quick response.
Jim, you know that I've taken on the establishment as the co-founder of No Boston Olympics. That's an issue that you followed very closely. I think you were even skeptical of my chances early on.
I
in
was.
That. But we got organized and we had the facts and the data. And the takeaway from the No Boston Olympic experience is that when you put good data and information in front of the people of Massachusetts, we make smart decisions. That's the job of the state auditor, and that's why I'm running for this office.
My
I only have
opponent is
I have
endorsed
to
by
hold
the
it. I
people
only
I'm
have a couple
taking
of
on.
things left, and I have very little time for both of you. Todd Wallach, in great reporting in the Globe before he left, kept reminding us that we're the only state in the country where the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive branch believe they're exempt from open meeting laws. One, is changing that a priority for you? Obviously, it's not within the purview of your office, but legislatively. And if it is it a fool's errand to think the legislature would ever change that, or do you think you could help lead such a charge?
Well, I think it's worth a shot, absolutely. And there's a real contrast in this race. My opponent on the campaign trail has been talking about making the legislature subject to the public records law. She has never actually filed legislation in 10 years of working in the legislature to do that. And the bill that was filed by Senator Jamie Eldridge last session, the senator didn't even co-sponsor that bill. Senator Eldridge has endorsed me in this race because of my fight to lead on transparency.
Is that true?
I have absolutely supported public records changes. I've been talking about it for years.
Did you sponsor that bill that he mentioned?
No, I didn't. I didn't co-sponsor a bill that Senator Eldridge did not ask me to co-sponsor. He never called me and asked me to co-sponsor his bill. I've sponsored my own legislation, filing 21 amendments to our Senate rules package to make sure that we have the ability to read bills before we vote on them, that we have at least 1 minute to read a bill, Jim. That's all I've asked for in the past. I've been denied that opportunity. The Senate shot down the Senate president that my opponent is endorsed by, shot down my bill to allow at least an hour to read a bill before we vote for them. That to me is absolutely unacceptable. I've been taking my leadership to task for going on 10 years now. 10 years. And I am the only candidate in this race that is called for a full legislative audit. Would you endorse me, Jim, if I was calling for an audit of you? Probably not. So I am taking on the establishment that my opponent is supported and endorsed by.
I'm thinking, by the way, that's why I didn't
my
answer.
opponent is the establishment pick. If you want the status quo, vote for my opponent. If you want bold and meaningful change,
okay,
I ask for your vote.
One last question about bold and meaningful change, starting with you, Senator. The legislature is overwhelmingly Democratic. It's going to be overwhelmingly Democratic after the elections in the fall. If polls are to believe, there'll be a Democratic governor. So essentially, we have a government that is virtually completely controlled by Democrats. Why would it not be better to have a Republican as auditor of the opposing party, as someone who oversees the spending of that totally Democratic government infrastructure in Massachusetts, Senator?
I think it's important that we have somebody that can stand up and speak truth to both parties. As you know, Jim, when I was sexually harassed as a legislative aide, I decided not to let them get rid of me or silence me with that non-disclosure agreement that they had required of me at the time. In order to collect my severance package, I decided to instead come back, run for state rep myself, and became the youngest woman serving in the House of Representatives at that time. I went toe-to-toe with former Speaker Bob DeLeo on the abuse of taxpayer-funded non-disclosure agreements to silence victims of harassment and discrimination in the House of Representatives. My opponent supports the taxpayer-funded NDAs to silence up harassment and abuse. And I have also gone toe-to-toe with Governor Baker on this. It has not been a partisan issue. It's important that somebody be able to be independent and stand up and speak truth to power.
Why not a Republican?
Well, I think independence is very important in this role, and I've taken on people of both parties, as you know, leading No Boston Olympics, taking on the establishment, and being outspent 1,500 to 1. I agree the senator's taken on the establishment. The difference is that I've taken it on, and I've actually won by winning the No Boston Olympics debate. I think it's also very important here that while this role is not partisan, that we have someone running for this office who shares our values. And the senator, if you look at her voting record, has one of the most conservative voting records in the entire state legislature. She has voted in the past against transgender rights, against gun control, against police reform.
Excuse me,
time after time, her values have been shown to be a socially conservative Democrat. And I don't think that that's what Democratic primary voters want in this election.
We have 15 seconds left in the debate.
My opponent is absolutely incorrect. I have a strong record, not only on transgender rights. I was proud to take that vote, and I have the endorsement of the two first elected transgender women in the Commonwealth because of taking that historic vote to support transgender rights. Councilor Holly Ryan and Councilor Jackie Ryan, who strongly support me because I have a strong and proven track record. Furthermore, I'm endorsed. Okay.
Senator,
so great to be here. Thank you so
much for your time. Chris Dempsey.
Thanks a lot, Jim.
Good luck to you both. Really appreciate it. That is it for tonight. Please come back tomorrow for a special debate series extra here in Greater Boston with a look at the Republican candidates for governor. While Chris Doty has agreed to join us for debate, his opponent Jeff Deal has not. So in lieu of a true face-off, we'll take a look back at both of their past appearances on the show. Then Adam Riley will join me to take stock of the major updates and changes, if any, in policy and public pronouncements since. Then Wednesday, we'll wrap up our 2022 primary debates with the candidates for Secretary of the Commonwealth, seven-term incumbent Bill Galvin and President of the Boston NAACP, Tanisha Sullivan. That's Wednesday at 7 here on GBH2, or see it first on the GBH News YouTube page at 6:30. The Boston Globe, WCVB, and WBU are also continuing their series of primary radio debates this week as well. I'd urge you to follow them. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.